Hey, this is Eric from Cafe Watercolor and welcome to another painting demo. Let's jump into it. So this painting was done a few months ago. The photo isn't taken by me, it's taken by my friend on Facebook. He actually shared this photo and invited artists to paint the same scenery. So it was really fun looking at other people's interpretation of the same scene. So this is an old alleyway in Taiwan, which is not a subject that I paint often because even though I grew up in Taiwan, I live in US, I live in Seattle, so this is not a scenery that I encounter. But I thought it would be fun to paint a scenery like these since I really miss Taiwan and I have this special bond with the place. So this is a very good subject for me to paint. So for this specific scenery, I spent quite a bit of time doing the drawing because it is an alleyway, so perspective become pretty important. Now it's pretty obvious that this photo is taken by a phone camera or a very wide angle lens. So when you're doing the perspective drawing, you do need to compensate for that a little bit. Make sure that the perspective is not that extreme. And here I am adding a figure here because there's no figure in the photo. But I think adding a figure that will make a little bit more visual interest because of the sunlight, and we have a figure that's lit by the sunlight. He'll cast a shadow, and which will be a little bit more interesting to look at. I also draw a small dog sleeping on the side of the alley, which is something that you do see quite a bit in Taiwan. At least for me, when I was little, I see a lot of homeless dog wandering around, sleeping on the side of the small alley where there's less car and so on. It might gotten a lot better now, but I just want to paint something from my memory. So adding a figure or dog in a scenery is not new. I do that a couple times already, but it's very important that you need to reference the perspective of your own painting just so that the person, the figure, or the dog, the animal, whatever you add into the scene, the scale won't be off. It should be believable, it should feel like the figure belongs to the scenery. So now I'm switching to my mechanical pencil to make a cleaner drawing, get to the detail just a little bit more. Before I was using a $4B pencil just to get the basic scale and position in. So now I'm actually spending time try to draw a little bit more detail. Now I'm using an eraser, try to erase some of the messy line, some of the construction lines that I did earlier. So I'm cleaning my palette a little bit. I haven't been cleaning that before this painting. But here I'm going to start with my first wash. The sky will be mostly blue with a little bit of the cloud, and I also mix some other color, like a warmer color as it comes down to the horizon. So I pre-wet the paper and start to paint in the blue sky so I can have a little bit of the soft cloud. I mix a little bit warmer blue so that it transitions from like a very saturated blue sky to something a little bit duller, a little bit warmer into the horizon because of the haze. And now because we are painting the color of the light in this wash, I also start to paint the building, the light of the building, also the tree on the side. And don't be afraid to just connect everything. Sometimes the color will bleed out and blend with each other pretty naturally. That's actually something that you want to get that nice soft glow of the light. So continue the wash, try to get a good coverage. Again, everything is light right now, so we don't need to worry about the color of the shadow, color of the dark or anything. And I just paint over the figure because it's going to dry it up a lot lighter. And I'll give the dog a little bit of a warm tone. Same thing for the figure, give it some skin tone. This turquoise looking door. So the first wash is pretty much done. We paint the color of the light And now we can start the second wash. So the second wash will be the middle value. I didn't do the value study for this one, so I need to make some judgment while I paint. The little chimney on the back actually is not this dark, but I just make it a little bit darker so it'll be a little bit more obvious than the light. And now I start to paint the middle value of the house. And at this stage, I am not worrying about much of the detail. So I know the detail looks really complicated in the photo, a lot of different wooden planks and poles and so on. But right now, I'm just trying to get the value down. So I will skip around a little bit, try to preserve a little bit of the highlight. But for the most part, it's going to be just middle value. And we can always come back in, adding some more darks and fill in those details later. So continue the wash, try to connect as much shape as possible. And even when you see those windows are a little bit more turquoise color, I just merge them all together. Because if you squint your eyes, a lot of the value will just merge and a lot of detail disappear. So while you can slow down a little bit and paint some of the details, don't forget that it's the big shape that makes the whole painting read. Sorry about the stuttering video, it was recorded with my old computer. The new one performs a lot better, so hopefully you won't see any more stuttering video in the future. So continue to connect the shapes. Also try to change color when it's needed. So essentially you have a big major shape, but within that shape you see a lot of transition in color and very subtle value changes. That's what makes a painting looks interesting and rich without being really complicated. A little bit of wet onto wet and finish this big shape. So the awning right outside of the door is also in the middle value. And so does all this reddish looking pot. Here I am just painting the shadow shape right away, connect to the building. A little bit hints of the background. For the background, you really don't need to be that complicated, even though there's a lot of details in the photo. Just keep the background very simple and easy to read. So now you can actually get a little bit sense of the lighting already without painting anything really dark. And that's the power of trying to simplify a complex scenery into big major shapes. And now since the major shape is established and the wash is still a little bit wet, I can do some wet onto wet. I can paint some of the textures on the wall, those wet stains and things like that. And that's the fun part of watercolor. You can play with those colors and you can play and creating those lost and found edges. And since the wash is still a little bit damp, I can actually mix a darker mixture and paint some darker values in it. So I can kind of get ahead of myself and try to paint a little bit of dark in this wash just to get those soft dark shapes. Now I'm starting to paint the dark value. And this is when we start to paint some details. But because we already established a good major shape, we can just paint the minor shape within that major shape, and that makes things a lot more easy because you already have a boundary and you know where things should fall in. So this is why we should first establish a major shape, then paint the secondary shape within that major shape, and then work on some of the minor detail shapes as needed. So here is the figure. It's very simple, just a guy with a white shirt and a dark pen. So a little bit of more dry brushing to add to the texture. Also use a palette knife to scrape away some of the details, just to add a little bit more textures. And now I'm starting to work on the details on the top of that wall here. And this is the part that can look a little bit more complicated, but I am not giving myself the pressure that I want to copy everything one to one. I squint my eyes a little bit as I paint this. I want to maintain the overall value relationship, that sense of lighting, while paint those dark openings. And I don't have to copy them one to one. They just need to be there and arrange it in a way that looks like details. So it might look like there's a lot of details, but as long as you keep the overall value relationship and just add a little bit of shapes within it, it should look pretty decent. And I continue the dark to the side of the building, getting some more details underneath the roof and underneath the window. Getting those form out. Mix some more dark and continue that dark shape. And we try to connect that to some of the background. So carry that dark down. And this dark in the background is actually going to help the figure pop up more, because the figure, half of the figure is lit by the sun. So the white t-shirt will actually look even brighter with some dark background. That will set up the contrast between light and dark. So here I'm using a smaller brush, trying to paint some of the details, and the house starting to look more and more complete. Some more dark underneath the roof there. Just want to make that wall a little bit darker. This is quite a fun painting because, again, it's not a subject that I usually paint. And I like subjects like these because it feels intimate, and even though it is nothing spectacular, it's not a big monumental landmark, sometimes a little alleyway scene like this in the rural area, in the countryside of Taiwan or wherever, it actually feels quite personal, and it actually triggers a lot more emotion and memories, at least for me, because when I was in Taiwan when I was little, this sort of alleyway is something that I do see from time to time, especially during the Chinese New Year. When I go to the southern part, middle and southern part of Taiwan, I get to see the scenery a lot more. So on the side, I start to paint some of the dark, and that started to define the trees on the side, the bushes on the side. And now I'm painting the dog. Again, the dog is sleeping. I did have a reference on my phone, so that's what I'm looking at. So adding a cast shadow by the figure and the dog. And add just a tiny little bit more details, a little bit of the green, some plants. And looking at where else I need to define their structure a little bit more. And sometimes it's just a matter of adding one or two more brushstrokes in certain areas, and that's about it. Painting a little bit of seam on the ground to get that concrete slab, concrete tile. Now I'm doing a glazing. Certain area can be a little bit darker, because after you paint some of the details, you kind of need to step back a little bit and look at the overall picture. Is the major shape still there? Is the sense of lighting still there? If not, maybe you need to punch the contrast just a little bit more to make the light pops just a little bit. And here is the finished painting. I'm really enjoying this one, and I hope you enjoy the process of this painting as well. If you enjoyed this video, please consider give it a like and subscribe. I'm Eric from Cafe Watercolor. See you next time.